The antique mahogany table glowed under the soft, dancing light of the bayberry-scented candles, their flames casting long, wavering shadows across the faces of the four people seated around it. The polished silver cutlery gleamed, a stark, cold contrast against the rich, blood-red linen napkins. It was a picture of perfect old-money elegance, a scene from a magazine. It was Christmas Eve, the one sacrosanct night of the year when we all diligently performed the elaborate ritual of pretending to be a loving, cohesive family. The air was thick with the smells of roasted turkey and pine, but underneath it all was the familiar acrid scent of tension. We were navigating the usual minefield of polite, meaningless conversation when my mother, Eleanor, carefully laid her sterling silver fork beside her porcelain plate. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with her napkin and offered a smile that was too wide, too sweet, and didn't quite reach her steely eyes. It was the smile that always preceded a carefully aimed blow. "Lena, darling," she began, her voice syrupy, "we needed to tell you something. You're not in the will anymore. Your father and I have decided it's best to leave everything to your brother instead." The words, delivered with such casual cruelty, did not just silence the room, they froze it solid. The last traces of my father's weak laughter died in his throat. I could feel his gaze, heavy with pity and cowardice, drop to his plate. Every eye, my mother's triumphant, my father's shamed, swiveled to me, waiting for the explosion. And across the table, Daniel, my perfect golden boy brother, chose that exact moment to raise his crystal glass of burgundy. A small, infinitesimal grin played on his lips, a look I had known and despised since we were children. It was the look he got right before he took something that was mine. "Come on, Mom," he said, the words laced with a condescending, half-hearted laugh meant to paint him as the reasonable one. "Don't say it like that. It's not her fault she made different life choices." Different life choices. The euphemism hung in the air, as palpable as the candle smoke. It was his polite, society-approved way of saying failure, of saying my struggle to build my own tech startup from the ground up instead of taking a cushioned vice president role at the family firm was a whimsical hobby, of reducing my entire life's passion and work to a rebellious phase. The words stung, sharp and hot, but I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply let the silence stretch, a calm settling over me that felt more powerful than any retort. Because nestled in my purse, which was hanging from the back of my chair, was a small, unassuming white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a document that held a secret I had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal. Their decision to cut me out was the final, liberating severance. And the news in that envelope, the official confirmation of my company's multi-million-dollar buyout, wasn't just my success. It was my goodbye. I met Daniel's smug grin with a small, quiet smile of my own. For now, I stayed silent. Let them have their victory. Mine was already secured. "I'm Lena. I'm 26, and I've always been the other child. Not the black sheep, not the rebel, just the other one, the placeholder in the family photo, the afterthought in the conversation. While my brother Daniel's trophies were polished and displayed on the mantelpiece, my achievements were treated like curiosities, briefly examined and then stored away in the attic. Daniel was the lawyer, the homeowner at 28, the living, breathing family trophy they could present to their friends. And me? I was the dreamer who left a perfectly good corporate job to start an online art business selling prints and original pieces to strangers on the internet. Mom called it playing shop, her voice dripping with disdain she never bothered to conceal. Dad, ever the peacemaker, would offer a weak, "Maybe one day you'll grow out of this hobby thing, Lena," as if my passion was a childhood phase like believing in fairies. Every holiday, every birthday, every forced family gathering felt like a fresh reminder that I wasn't enough, that my version of success was illegible to them. And every single Christmas, a foolish, stubborn little hope would bloom in my chest, whispering that this year they would see me. It never was. Dinner carried on in a thick, awkward silence after Mom's little announcement. The only sounds were the sharp clink of silverware and the glug of wine as Mom liberally refilled her glass. Dad, desperate to break the tension, made some hollow joke about financial responsibility that landed with a thud. Aunt Carl, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination, reached over and patted my shoulder as if I were a recent widow. There, dear," she murmured. "Something else will come along." I tried to eat, to play my part in the charade, but the perfectly cooked turkey turned to dry, flavorless dust in my mouth. I was chasing a bite with a sip of water when Mom, incapable of letting the victory lie, added the final clarifying blow. "Daniel's always been the sensible one, the one with a real plan," she declared, as if reading from a script she had rehearsed in the mirror. "He'll know how to handle things, how to preserve the family legacy." It was in that moment, as the words sensible and legacy hung in the air, that the cold shock finally melted away. The only thing I could feel then was the slow, simmering burn of a pure, undiluted anger igniting deep within me, a fire that promised this would be the last time I ever had to sit at their table. Because what she didn't know, what none of them in their cocoon of smug superiority could possibly have fathomed, was that for the last 2 years, while they dismissed me as a dilettante, I had been quietly building something real. While Daniel was managing trust funds and playing golf with clients, I was coding through the night, designing user interfaces, and negotiating with manufacturers. My little online art business had evolved into Lumen, a curated platform for digital artists that was about to go public. The investor deal, the one I had been nursing for 6 grueling months, had just closed, and that crisp white envelope in my purse held the final executed contracts, the undeniable proof. After dinner, as the rich food settled like a lead weight in my stomach, everyone migrated to the living room, drawn by the glittering promise of gifts beneath the sprawling tree. I began to follow, my body moving on autopilot, when my mother's voice, cloying and sharp as a needle, called out from the hallway. "Lena, sweetheart, the kitchen is a bit of a state. Could you clear the table first? You don't mind, do you?" Her tone was syrupy sweet, but I knew the translation. It was my perennial role, to stay out of the way, to handle the mess while they enjoyed the rewards. So I stood there alone at the sink, my hands submerged in the scalding soapy water, washing the very plates from which they had just feasted. From the next room, their laughter, Daniel's a booming, confident sound, my father's a reedy echo, mixed with the bland cheer of Christmas music and the crinkle of wrapping paper. It was a symphony of fake joy, a ritual of exclusion. And that's when I smiled, a slow, private curve of my lips against the steam, because I knew, with the certainty that warmed me from the inside out, exactly what was coming. When the clock on the mantel finally struck 9, the cue for the gift-giving ceremony to begin in earnest, I walked in, deliberately wiping my damp hands on a dish towel. I took my place beside the tree, a silent observer amidst the opulent pile of presents. My mother, the queen of her domain, loved to go last, always saving her most grandiose moment for the finale. She glanced at my empty hands, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "Lena, dear, you didn't have to bring anything this year," she said, her voice a masterclass in condescending magnanimity. "Your presence is gift enough." The room went quiet, all eyes on me. I met her gaze, my own steady and clear. "Oh, but I did," I answered, my voice calm and carrying. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out the unassuming envelope. "This one's for you, Mom." I held it out, The plain white rectangle a stark contrast to the shiny beribboned boxes surrounding it. Consider it my final report on that little hobby of mine. She took the envelope from my hand with her long, manicured fingers, her expression of bemused tolerance. That same practiced fake smile was still plastered on her face, a mask she wore for unwanted gifts and inconvenient relatives. "What's this now, dear? A little drawing?" she asked, her tone lightly mocking, as she slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. But as her eyes dropped and scanned the first few lines of the official document inside, her face began to change. The condescending smile stiffened, then withered completely. The carefully applied blush on her cheeks stood out in stark, garish contrast as the natural color drained from her skin, leaving her pale and, suddenly, profoundly old. Her breath hitched, a tiny, sharp sound in the now silent room. Because inside was not a drawing. It was a formal, legally binding letter from a title company, the confirmation of the completed property transfer for the old lake cabin, the one with the stone fireplace and the creaky dock that belonged to my grandparents, the one where I had spent the happiest summers of my childhood, the one Mom had sold years ago without a second thought to pay off Daniel's law school tuition, calling it a practical investment. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had tracked it down. I had used the first major capital from my company's seed funding to make an offer, negotiating through a third party so the sentimental connection wouldn't inflate the price. I'd bought it back, under my own company's name, Lumen Holdings. "You," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes wide with the confusion that was rapidly curdling into something else, dread. "You bought this?" "Paid in full," I said, my voice soft, yet it seemed to echo in the stunned quiet. I didn't need to shout. The truth was loud enough. "And by the way, the papers are filed with the county clerk. It's in my name now. It's mine." The room went utterly, profoundly silent. The last notes of A Christmas Carol from the stereo faded into nothingness. Daniel's trademark smirk, which had been a permanent fixture all evening, vanished, replaced with a look of dumbfounded shock. He looked from our mother's ashen face to the document in her trembling hand, trying to process how his predictable, underachieving sister had orchestrated this. My dad simply stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if he was seeing a stranger, or perhaps, for the very first time, seeing the real me. Then I stood up. I didn't push my chair back, I simply rose, my movements calm and deliberate. I looked at each of them, in turn. My mother, clutching the paper like a death notice, my father, paralyzed in his armchair, my brother, his golden boy aura suddenly tarnished and dim. "I may not be in your will," I said, the words clear and cutting in the hush. "But I don't need to be, because while you are all too busy doubting me, dismissing me, and deciding my future for me, I was actually building something real. I built it on my own, without your connections, without your approval, and certainly without your money." I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked out of the living room, through the foyer, and pulled my coat from the closet. I left before anyone could form a word, a plea, or an accusation. I closed the heavy front door behind me, the solid thud, a final, satisfying punctuation to the evening. Outside, the world was hushed and new. Snow was falling, soft and silent, blanketing the manicured lawn and the expensive cars in the driveway. Each flake was a tiny absolution. I stood there for a moment, the cold air stinging my cheeks, and felt the weight of a lifetime of expectations, of never being quite enough, simply lift away and dissipate into the winter night. For the first time in my life, standing alone in the dark, I didn't feel small. I felt an expansive, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of freedom. And walking away from that house, from the ghosts of Christmases past, I realized something with crystalline clarity. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family isn't forgiveness or understanding or even love. Sometimes it's simply showing them, once and for all, that you never needed their approval to succeed. And in that realization, you give yourself the greatest gift of all.